The extraterrestrial generals entered Earth's soil with a mocking tone, their inflexible posture that exudes superiority when they looked around the tall, dark forests. They mocked the greenery in front of them, speaking in their native tongue to one another linguistic commentary on their archaic vastness of trees, and the undergrowth surrounding them. Earth was merely an undeveloped area, and its woodlands don't superior to an antiquated natural prison in contrast to the sleek, the chaotic mess artificial environments from which they came. They were unable to comprehend how anybody had ever lived, let alone prospered. In such an unregulated and chaotic setting, the general's armor was shining with the refined accuracy of extraterrestrial technology, lifted a flipping scanning device through quick holographic readouts. He was perplexed by the readings in Earth's here. The atmosphere was much denser than expected, the canopy to be too dense for its signal to easily burst through, he mumbled as he snapped his tongue in. Annoyance. This forest was little more than an annoyance, and a bothersome obstacle on their strategy for controlling him. Officers shuffled uneasily, looking above their shoulders at the weighty tall trees' shadows in spite of their bluster. Some of them experienced a slight. It was causing them to feel uneasy. It knotted them, but it was subtle and easy to overlook, because of the eerie silence in the forest. It was as if the ecology as a whole had stopped at they are there, observing and waiting. The general was leaned against by one officer and whispered his worries, but the general simply dismissed him with his hand flicked dismissively in the distance that is partially obscured by layers of branches and leaves. A single figure saw his silhouette blend in with them. His motions blended in perfectly with the forest. Calm and silent, the Green Beret, one of the best troops on Earth, had been monitoring their arrival from the start. He was landed by their ship. The forest was more than just a landscape. It was an ally, as a living, breathing location where he knew the back as well as the understanding. Of his own hand, each sway, each rustling, he was able to read the language of a branch. Each time the ace signal changes, he automatically realized he kept his observing the generals from a distance. He was aware of the position of hiding, the conceit that accompanied their type superiority of technology, and the contempt when something didn't glean with all and circuitry. He was aware that they viewed Earth as weak as an old man, and he had witnessed their type in previous conflicts with other locations. But he was also aware of something. This forest wasn't theirs, was it? Conquer the actual land, which is covered with tangled with roots and surrounded by undergrowth, was incorporated into his plan. It would, as his weapon and shield returned. The generals in the alien ranks kept moving their scanners ahead, with machinery clicking and humming as they have yet to gather samples and log data. Their technology was strangely constrained, unable to pass through the dense. The Green Beret cannot be detected by the foliage, so close that they hadn't expected that the natural surroundings could hinder for them. The density of the forest was a hassle, nothing more. The Green Beret is keeping an eye on their every move, every shortcoming. They depended on their gadgets for everything, immobile, traversing the landscape without continuous direction from their scanners. Their senses, blunted by technological dependence, overlooked the faint footprints he had purposefully left in the neighboring mud. Tiny hints that he was present to observe a predator who only allows his prey to sense him further exacerbate their discomfort. One of the generals squatted when they saw the prints. After carefully examining them, he termed the others are overly, pointing at the shape of a boot in the ground, studied it, while whispering their prior assurance with a little bit of the jungle appeared to enclose them as they snuggled. As the silence grew louder, their silent discussions, every mutter, a quick glance over their shoulders revealed an indication that their poise was starting to. Beret saw the change in order to breach the green in their manner and gave himself permission to little grin as the jungle worked its disturbing them from deep within, taking advantage of their conceit. It's simple to attack them right now, while even if they were already unsteady. That wasn't the strategy he wanted them to believe. The forest's weight bearing down need their trust to be further undermined. His ally would be the forest itself in our conflict as a discreet, vigilant ally in his mission. Therefore he stayed out of sight. Shadow inside the shadows that allows the overall wallow in their personal discomfort. The Green Beret's weapon was patience. Softly went about his measured steps. An expert at blending in with the surroundings, he had a great understanding of these woodlands. Each leaf, branch, and usage instructions them to his benefit. With accuracy, he started laying traps around the alien's perimeter. Although the general's landing site is small, useful traps that would send a statement without disclosing his precise place. He had no interest in conflict, but instead he concentrated on disturbing them when he appeared, recognized by minor tactical hiccups. A tripwire was the first trap. struck beneath a dense canopy of leaves when one of the extraterrestrial scouts advanced. He fell after his foot hooked on it. His body slammed hard onto the crash left him on the woodland floor. Briefly stunned, along with his friends hurried to assist him, clearly confused they weren't accustomed to their movements. Challenges of this nature in their instruction had equipped them for technologically combat is not for the unprepared. The characteristics of the wilderness on Earth generals looked at each other. Former assurance ebbing away as they had trouble understanding what they were confronting each other as they reassembled in a trap triggered a branch that jerked back with abrupt force that sends dirt and leaves flying straight into the scouts' faces, momentarily stunned and dazzled their foreign perceptions overpowered by the grime and dust of the soil on Earth. This was not mishap, and they were aware that they had been observed, monitored, and predicted, and the insights descended upon them like a gloomy cloud. The generals gave their soldiers to spread out and look for the origin of these disturbances, but there was no sign of Green Beret. Disappeared with a practiced ease. Into the forest's interior as if despite having no intention, he participated in it, of being discovered and having no desire to divulge himself, but his goal was to make people uncomfortable, to force them to feel the burden of his presence without ever seeing him each time they detected a rustling noise and he adds a twig snap to their leaves. Worry, each one serving as a reminder that they were in uncharted area and being pursued by someone who was familiar with the land superior to the woodland than they could ever hope to appear to magnify their pain. Its quiet is nearly deafening. They listened carefully in its intensity. All of the alien soldiers are on high alert. Guns raised, looking around the trees for any indication of movement. However, there was just the thick, impenetrable barriers green of the forest that goes on forever. Their technology is in every direction, which they appeared to rely so largely on their sensors were useless in this situation. Impossible to move due to the thick vegetation to pierce the canopy layers that prevented the Green Beret from being discovered. One of the foreign generals made an effort to utilize his sophisticated scanning apparatus, yet it unable to record more than a handful of meters, he struck the gadget out of irritation. A rare moment of insecurity, and the soldiers surrounding him noted the confidence of the leaders was eroding, and it spread like wildfire among the ranks. They served as a means of control. To observe, quantify, and monitor everything, they were blind all about them, and the Green Beret stared in terror. Evaluating from his concealed vantage point, he could see the fear in their responses, beginning to infiltrate their actions, the manner that they looked at the tightening hold on their shoulders, firearms, and they were both becoming very suspicious. Someone who was certain that something was hiding, he was barely out of their line of sight. Accomplished his goals, he had added a tiny bit of doubt and a fracture in their pretense of invincibility. One alien at a time, soldiers started to flee and fall back, nearer to their group's safety, hesitant to deviate much from the others. They were a close-knit group, but their discipline was being undermined by the terror, making them reckless, causing them to trip. Makes their walks awkward and heavy. In contrast to the silent Green Beret, measured motions that he had transformed their advantage into a disadvantage. Utilized their numbers against them by making them perform actions that as the sun dipped, they expressed their fear. Long shadows are spread across the Green Beret grew more intense on the woodland floor. His attempts to set more traps, one after another designed to increase their perception of dread, a straightforward trap here, a displaced rocks, little interruptions, each one a notification that they were being pursued. He didn't have to face them head-on to accomplish his goal. He simply needed to let them know he was out there, observing and waiting for each tiny triumph. The Green Beret clenched his grasp of the circumstance that is attracting them farther into the woodland, away from their landing site, far from any possibility of the forest, turned into his weapon of choice. Reigning his ally in this situation is natural. He could observe the consequences of the silent war. His approach, the manner in which they become increasingly desperate in their communications. They were becoming more tense, disintegrating, and he hadn't even revealed his face. For all of their training, generals' experience were at a loss, having encountered planets were overrun by armies, although they had never faced a danger such as this one, an invisible adversary who used the land as a weapon. They attempted to take back, giving orders and selecting urgent tones. But there was a suggestion in their voices they were losing this out of desperation. Combat, and the Green Beret was aware of it, had compelled them to take a certain viewpoint. They weren't equipped for combat. They were unsure of how to battle each other. Trap every well-thought-out move he took removed their self-assurance from them. The jungle closed in, leaving the vulnerable exposed. Every shadow surrounding them serves as a reminder of their increasing susceptibility, with every step an awareness of their powerlessness, and the Green Beret observed, anticipating the ideal time to execute his next move. Silent victory is already beginning to emerge in. The Green Beret shifted in their thoughts. Across the woodland with complete familiarity with each aspect of nature to stay hidden with each cautious, he guided the extraterrestrial generals and their forces that move farther into the forest, allowing the terrain turns into a barrier for them, instead of a place where he might hide. The alien army trailed behind them, strained to cope with the strange density of stumbling over roots on the woodland floor, and they stumble through dense undergrowth. Were in areas that did not adhere to the regulations that they were accustomed to knew would heighten their uneasiness. Their perception of the aliens' fragility forces were used to technology, greaterness, but in this area it denoted little about their advanced machinery created to facilitate clear, open interactions. Was the forest canopy here is nearly unusable, interfered with their communications, and the layers were impervious to scanners of vegetation, timber, and earth in every effort to collect information about their environment was. The forest itself prevented the soldiers become irritated with their discipline starting to deteriorate as the surroundings weakened their concentration and calm. They continued to scan their surroundings, looking for some assurance in their strange surroundings, yet they discovered not a single step on the soft earth appeared to be hyperware to echo. Of every sound, every leaf rustling the trees remained motionless and lofty, as even if they were seeing the soldiers. There was something primal in every action. Regarding this setting, something that didn't react to technology or reason, the extraterrestrial generals are typically very calm, and strategic discovered that they couldn't traverse this uncertain terrain and their tension was evident. Green Beret observed that the uneasiness observing their responses to each twig snap or change in the shadows of he was aware that nature was receding. Itself was favoring him by producing a setting in which the aliens' dependence on technology was more of a barrier than rather of being helpful. The landscape was full of with unexpected natural risks. Steep slopes, concealed streams, and areas of mud that delayed and tugged at their feet. These minor obstacles weren't there in their pace. Challenge he had been putting in for years, learning how to navigate these woodlands, but they were constant to them. Reminders of insurmountable hurdles. The Green's increasing powerlessness. Beret didn't have to make any more traps. The actual woodland turned into the ideal clusters and logs for ambush fall. The dense vegetation inherently compelled the alien troops into confined spaces, directing them to locations where they were more vulnerable. Each soldier made an effort to remain near the others out of fear of being abandoned or cut off from the group in their rush to proceed. They started making blunders by running into each other, whispering nervously to each other. Even the general's orders were becoming less typical edge with an impatient tone. An annoyance instead of assurance the warriors started to feel as they moved. The forest's weight bearing down on shadows lengthened on them, and through the leaves, light trickled in strange designs that provide the appearance of action that made them feel even more uneasy. The Green Beret was out of their line of sight, but they were aware that he was somewhere, observing them and following their every move. The woodland, with all of its unforeseen turns and twists, was gradually strengthening its grip on them at every opportunity, appeared to lead them farther away with no obvious way out. Their uneasiness was evident upon landing, exacerbated by the quiet surrounding their own universes on which they might depend, the murmur of machines that followed the steady beat of technology that gave this place structure and comfort. The only sound was the gentle rustle of leaves, the far-off summons of invisible animals. Although it was a foreign planet, he was at home for the Green Beret, and that feeling of inclusion provided him with he has an unquestionable advantage at every turn. Was determined for each movement and sound. Intentional, he was aware of where they would falter, he would pause. Took advantage of it without ever once. He showed himself the alien army. A common sense of superiority unites them. Started to turn against one another in subtle ways that each person places blame on the other due to their lack of advancement. Its once coordinated motions dispersed. Their channels of communication broke down as they debated the best course of action. As time went on, this lack of togetherness worked in the Green Beret's favor, giving him authority their motions with little exertion. The every additional impediment turned the woodland into a maze, causing them to veer off course, and by now out into the unknown. The alien generals realized they were in a trap. Even though they didn't want to acknowledge, they attempted to mobilize their troops, pushing them on, but it was obvious that the spirits of the group had been shattered. Previously self-assured warriors are now covered, sweating and filthy, peered around with they were feeling a mix of fear and fatigue. then pulled into a strange, relentless landscape that showed little concern about their ranks, their technology, or their ability to survive machine dependence. Dull's instincts were now intensifying their efforts against them. Each minor anxiety into an increasing feeling of fearfully, the Green Beret observed his strategy is working flawlessly as it unfolds. He didn't have to confront them. He had transformed the actual woodland into an enemy that they were unable to defeat, discovered that the generals were starting to lose command, that the soldiers were falling in authority. No longer moving in unison, but rather paused and went back over their shoulders and questioned each order. Their once dominant figures appeared to little and defenseless. Dwarfed by the trees that towered over them like darkness started to decline, the soldiers' movements become less active when their energy was depleted by hours of blundering through challenging landscape that their alien bodies were accustomed to. Regulated environments of their vessels, and the humidity was a problem for the cities. Extremely dense air that they have never experienced prepared to confront a foe they couldn't see or comprehend. The Green Berets outwitted them without using superior arms, but with endurance, talent, and in deep familiarity with his environment. The woods have turned into a mirror, mirroring their own shortcomings back at them, making them face their restrictions. That the generals are aware of depth of their interchange of miscalculations, expressions that conveyed their resignation undervalued the planet's forest and the people who once protected it. An unbreakable line of extraterrestrial troops had become a disjointed, exhausted group enmeshed in the wilderness that was not revered or dreaded them, and in the darkness, the Green Beret was ready in case the last stage of his strategy, aware that the most of the job was already completed by the forest. According to him, the Green Berets saw the now foreign generals and their troops. Worn out and devoid of their previous nevertheless, they had faltered, battled, and pushed up against the unforgiving woodland barriers, and it manifested physically exhausted and ill-prepared for this type of conflict. There were no longer any. They had been composed forces when every soldier's stance upon landing was stiff, their hands trembling, their eyes darting, firmly gripping firearms. In spite of being aware that their technology had let them down, they were completely exposed here. And he was prepared to reveal to them the actual cost of he quickly struck due of their poor judgment. Use his extensive knowledge of the tier, every move he made was advantageous to him. Thoughtful, each blow is calculated, and every positional decision as he Green Beret mastery was closed over the alien stealth became obvious. Only troops are unable to identify him. A glimpse of a flickering shadow, a rustle of movement that came and went suddenly. Panic took hold of their ranks as each blow shattered them even more. Their self-assurance, one by one, separately soldiers collapsed, unaware of his whereabouts, where he came from, or how he disappeared. The alien generals, in a frantic attempt to manage the circumstances that defied orders in their home country, trying to rally their tongue troops into positions of defense. But there was a desperate edge to their tones that confessed their own concern that they were leaders used to giving orders from a dominant position. But here they were defenseless in the face of an adversary who could their warriors disappear into thin air. Pondered whether to seek or obey, cover motivated by instinct instead of training. The woodland, which was previously disregarded as inconsequential, turned into a maze of terror for the branches of their trees, and the Green Beret was hidden by shadows as he moved with such proficiency at every step that appeared to be almost supernatural to his adversaries, giving the impression that he was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. The target of the strike was quick and precise. Soldiers viewed from strange perspectives, taking advantage of their uncertainty and turning it into chaos. For each and every soldier who died simply made the tightening stress worse. Fear's hold on those who stayed as the Green Beret went on, standing his attack on the movements of the extraterrestrial soldiers, became awkward and stumbled out of desperation over one another in an effort to look for cover or shoot them again. Coordination broke the previously dominant figures that had made its way into the jungles of Earth as conquerors gathered in tiny groups, hurriedly looking through their circumstances that they had lost sight of themselves as both prey and hunters. And each instance reaffirmed this change. The generals acknowledged the gravity of their error, attempted to retreat and reorganize, but there was no secure area. Green Beret had foreseen each and every use the pattern of the forest to manage their choices. As they attempted to, he was there, cutting off their retreat. Rode with accurate blows when they tried to assemble their troops into. He hit a defensive circle from behind, breaking down their structures before they could arrange everything completely. The actual jungle appeared to be closing in on. They provide no escape or respite. Even the seasoned generals started displaying indications of exhaustion, and a fear of their motions weakening their directives and growing slower. They had never encountered such a foe. An adversary that did not rely on overwhelming brute force or firepower, depending on talent, strategy, perseverance, and the realization hit them so forcefully that they had gone into a battlefield that wasn't theirs, deciding on one they had no control over. Their power and advanced weapons and counts all of their technology was ineffective against a foe who possessed and was familiar with the land. Like a weapon, with each victory, the Green Beret chipped away at the strike. Their numbers, their morale, and weakening their fortifications even more. He didn't give them a chance to reassemble or reevaluate. Every moment of confusion became a chance for every error, and the extraterrestrial soldiers' dread was now being opened. Their eyes are shallow and their breath is noticeable. Broad darting in response to each motion in the shadows, the conflict was over. Conquest was a struggle for existence, and some of the aliens were disappearing. Troops motivated only by desperation tried to separate from the main gang, attempting to flee into the woods. However, the Green Beret foresaw these motions, easily intercepting them with the cover of the forest to get closer quietly and firmly hit those who attempted to escape, just to verify the helplessness in their circumstances, increasing the level of panic within the ranks. The extraterrestrial has nowhere to go or hide. Generals, observing the disintegration of their forces, had no choice except to resort to the relentless. The Green Beret assault's accuracy has left them discouraged and weakened, revealed in a manner that they had never encountered before. They had presumed Earth's defenses were weak, primitive, its inhabitants are feeble. But in this, they were in the forest's silence, confronting a reality they hadn't expected, that people in their own element were capable of being just as strong as any adversary they faced. Ever faced with the realization of their failure, the generals made a last-ditch effort, yelling commands to create a defensive line. But they didn't say their men had lost faith in the authority. And there weren't enough of them who were left to react based on habit, instead of an assurance that the woodland had previously asserted their power, that they were engaged in a conflict that they could not achieve. His goal of winning the Green Beret, now nearly finished. Observed as the remaining alien forces attempted to maintain their position, he could see their fear, fatigue, and the burden of his goal was to repair their damaged pride. Almost beyond his point, they had ridiculed Earth's forest, its protectors, primal nature, which they now comprehended their mistake with a clarity derived from. In order to defeat the Green Beret, their own conceit against them, causing them to turn their turning presumptions into flaws and demonstrating that the defenders of Earth were far away. With one final blow, he was helpless. Concluded the engagement and departed from the surviving aliens, who don't have any illusions regarding their power. They arrived as invaders, but they would depart as survivors, bringing the recollection of a struggle that they had not anticipated, facing a foe they had not realized. The aliens' final soldiers, who are rattled and fatigued, hardly maintained their position. Huddled in what was to the left of their formation, they once now commanding generals appeared weary and triumphed, their self-assurance shattered by the Green's constant pressure betrayal strategies. This last instance was no longer a struggle for dominance, but an unambiguous disclosure of their sensitivity. They had gotten into Earth's arrogant woodlands, making fun of its natural defenses, were persuaded that numbers and technology would guarantee both advantages are now taken away from victory and safety. They encountered the truth of a fight they didn't anticipate. The remaining foreign soldiers were traded terrified looks, each one aware that the escape the Green Beret couldn't have dismantled each of their rankings using their own dread of them, and currently they realized there was no way to get out. The actual forest appeared to close in on, thereby intensifying the subdued stress that at their last defenses. They were nodded, totally vulnerable to an adversary who had consistently outwitted them. Putting them in this irreversible, the alien generals were cornered. Clutching the extent of their loss, could not longer disregard the repercussions of they had made a mistake and undervalued both the landscape and the human adversary that had shielded him from their might, dependent on technology, and power was useless in this place. The terrain, the quiet, and the adversary that employed it so skillfully had, leaving them totally vulnerable. With each moment, the assurance of their decline became increasingly obvious. The goal of the Beret plan had been accomplished. By weakening their resolve to resist, he had long prevailed in the psychological battle. Prior to this last second, the generals, knowing that, they continued to hold their firearms. All they could do was surrender. Their troops were reduced in number, disheartened, and all of the alleged superiority had been erased away from one invisible enemy. The pressure of their mistake on them, a sobering insight that they, having made fun of the strength of an Earth, the idea archaic in that silent, uncluttered hearing about the discovered alien forces, oneself confronting the real repercussions of their conceit. They had thought the defenders of Earth would fall swiftly, that its woodlands were only in difficulty as a setting for a quick conquest, but the fact that they were defeated was now indisputable, and each survivor. The pressure of their mistake on them a sobering insight that they, having made fun of the strength of an Earth Day idea archaic in that silent, uncluttered hearing about the discovered alien forces, oneself confronting the real repercussions of their conceit. They had thought the defenders of Earth would fall swiftly, that its woodlands were only in difficulty as a setting for a quick conquest, but the fact that they were defeated was now indisputable, and each survivor felt as though the lesson was sinking in. Harsh, unwavering awareness that Earth was far from helpless. It had encountered their arrogance with regard to resilience and displayed a strength that they hadn't thought feasible, but unable to face the enemy they had previously written off as inconsequential. The remaining aliens they made a leisurely retreat. Tossing cautious looks inside the interior of the forest is still plagued by shadows, was unable to interpret the quiet that had turned into their ruthless enemy each. Their action served as a reminder of the adversary that they had never really seen, of the soldier who had changed their mind opposing them as they departed. The alien generals on the battlefield sensed the weight of their defeat. Its technology, their armaments, and their authority, everything had been made meaningless in the front of a tactic. They hadn't been ready to respond to what they had ridiculed the people and woods of Earth, but that they left as the ridicule had turned against them. Bringing a sense of respect with them in defeat, they hadn't considered a humbling to be feasible. Knowledge that the defenders of Earth were not to be undervalued. The Green Beret, because of his vantage, hidden, saw them depart from his entire purpose. He had defended his land, his planet, without disclosing anything at all. Himself completely, his triumph was greater than bodily. It was a silent victory over conceit, is evidence of the strength of tolerance and comprehension of one's terrain, that his adversary had to acknowledge Earth's might, and that just having knowledge would be a deterrence against extraterrestrial invasions in the future. Sadly, generals are now conscious of their personal restrictions, withdrew carrying a renewed appreciation for a planet at one point. They made fun of their retreat as an acknowledgement of the green in silence, Earth's resilience, and Berets' skill, implicit assurance that this was a location they wouldn't dare challenge once more.